What an amazing turnout. It's so great to see everyone.
Wonderful.
So I think, yeah, maybe Noni, I think we can probably start now and just folks can jump in next couple minutes.
Excellent. All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I am so happy to see so many of you joining us for this conversation this evening. For those of you joining the Gordon community for the first time tonight, my name is Noni Thomas Lopez, and I am the head of the Gordon School. And I'm excited to welcome you to Race in the USA, the Remix. This evening's program is part of Gordon's ongoing series of parent dialogues on anti-racist education. Race in the USA, the Remix, will be a two-part discussion that uses lessons on Black experience in America drawn from Gordon's 8th grade curriculum to help our community and parents in particular think about how to talk with children about race. The second part of this series will be held on Tuesday, March 2nd. We hope you'll be back for that. It's free. And again, like this program tonight, open to the public. Tonight, side A of the Remix is helping children and adults make sense of their racial identities. So last week we saw in real time an attack on our democracy, our rule of law, and as Confederate flags flew for the first time in the halls of Congress, there was no doubt that the attack was rooted firmly in white supremacy. While the images we saw may have been shocking, if you're a student of history and of American history, it should not have been surprising. Racial violence from slavery to Jim Crow to George Floyd is America's original sin. And unless we're able to acknowledge that sin as a country through a process of reckoning, reconciliation, and redemption, then moments like what we saw last week will happen again. So, what can we do? We can do the work, the personal work, the interpersonal work, the institutional work of dismantling this foundation of racism on which this country was built. So tonight's program is a demonstration of our intention to get to work with our community by showing you how we do this work with our children. 8th grade humanities teacher Luke Anderson, our guide tonight, is a master at getting young people to talk about hard stuff by sharing his own experiences, his vulnerabilities around topics of race, class, gender. He creates a safe space that provides just the right amount of dissonance required for learning. We want our children to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and with grappling with uncomfortable topics. In this way, our students become more confident and empathetic learners and leaders. So tonight you'll get a peek into an 8th grade classroom through one of their lessons with Mr. Anderson, and you'll experience what's needed to provide a space for young people to explore who they are and what that means as they navigate the world. Tonight, you will learn a lot, and it will also be interactive. We'll ask you to break into small groups later for some guided inquiry. And I'm thankful for the Gordon teachers and administrators who, after a very long day, have agreed to serve as facilitators. Gabe Bernstein, Lynn Bowman, Veronica Jutras, Amber Bennett, Rebecca Garfield, Jeff Griffin, Cindy Arias, Frances Martindale, Julie Parsons, and Tamara Paul. Thank you very, very much. And I thank all of you for coming tonight and for being brave enough to engage with us in this work. So without further ado, I will pass the mic to our guide for this evening, our 8th grade humanities teacher, Luke Anderson.
Thank you so much, Noni. And again, it's just really wonderful to see 102 people, right, choosing to come on a Zoom at 6:30 on a Tuesday evening to talk about, such a vital issue, right? And I just am really excited to share a little bit about what we do, or what I do in the classroom with my students. So without further ado, let's get into it. So first, I just wanted to say, just to get us thinking, I was wondering if anyone would type into the chat, what words come to mind when you think about conversations about racial identity, and or racism in your immediate family? Like when you think about talking to the people who live in your bubble, right? What words come to mind? Just feel free to type into the chat. Seeing words like defensiveness, discomfort, emotion, avoidance, frustration, lots of planning, stress, challenge. That's really helpful. Um, when you look at all these words that everyone is dropping into the chat, these are hard conversations to have. They're hard to have with our immediate families. They're hard to have with our extended families, and certainly in our places of work, right? And I think schools are a place where we need to have these conversations. I think they have to happen everywhere. But it's something that I really relish, right? It's part of why I came to Gordon, so that I can have these conversations. And so while what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about some of these hard conversations I have with kids and how I kind of get them to a place to be willing to share. I just hope that you take what you take away is this understanding that this is hard and this is a process, right? And just I really appreciate again that you all are willing to engage. So I just want to move on, keep moving here. We're going to talk. I'm going to talk a lot about when I first knew what my race was. And again, I appreciate if you read the article or the essay I wrote when I was 17. I really appreciate you checking that out. And if you haven't read it, it was linked in the invite, and feel free to take a look. I'm going to read a short excerpt from that eventually. So we'll talk about this idea of when you first knew what race you are a little bit later. You'll have a chance to. Before we get started, there's a couple things I want to do. First off, just a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the peoples of the Narragansett and the Pokanoket nations as the original inhabitants and enduring stewards of the land and waters upon which Gordon School is located. Let us commit to reconciling and partnering with all Indigenous peoples whose lands and waters we benefit from today. So please join me in a moment of silence to reflect on the history of this land, and let us begin to think of ways we can, as individuals and as an institution, partner with Indigenous peoples. Okay, thank you for that. I want to talk about our community agreements too. If you've participated in one of these conversations before, these aren't new to you. And I just think it's really important that, these kind of lay down some of the ground rules, because I know some folks are new to this community. So, first is mute your mic, not yourself, right? I know it's dinner time and there could be noises that are emanating from your various children's bedrooms or from your kitchen. So just try to keep yourself muted for now. There'll be a chance to talk later, I promise. Also, be more curious than certain. One thing as a teacher at Gordon, really my entire career, it sounds strange, but I know that I don't have all the answers, right? And that my curiosity about kids and about learning is really kind of sustained me as an educator. Certainly, we want to assume positive intentions, but also owning your impact, right? Exact same things I say to my own students. Also, this is a huge conversation, right? That we're not going to have closure this evening. So just, be ready to expect and accept lack of closure. We hope that you're fully present, as much as you can be. I know it's on Zoom. And this last one is really important. I want you to challenge yourself to make space or take space. In the breakout rooms, there should be about 8 or 9 people per room, and there'll be a Gordon faculty member there facilitating. But we really hope that we want to give you a chance to express yourself and kind of explain some of your thinking around race, but also while making space for other folks. So we're really going to try to, especially in the discussions in the breakout rooms, try to limit your comments to 2 minutes or less. So if there's no objections to the community agreements, I'm gonna get into our presentation here today. So. Oh, one more thing. Sorry, our agenda, just to give you a sense of what we're up to today. So I'm going to spend some time just talking about, these issues of bias and racial identity and really framing it around Gordon's approach and really what I do in my classroom specifically, right? So then next, I'm going to give you a chance to journal. So a chance to reflect on your own experience with race. You're going to be doing exactly the same assignment that I do with my students in 8th grade. So if you don't have one yet, you're going to want to grab a pen and the paper or a notebook of some sort. There'll be some sharing in smaller groups after the journaling, and then we'll come back together for a whole group share, and then we'll wrap up with some closing, some next steps, and some resources that I want to share with you all. All right, so let's get into it here. So I want to start by beginning, just being really upfront with these are some of the topics that we examine with 8th graders at Gordon. We just began our Holocaust unit. And if you can imagine, in the midst of the storming of the Capitol building, I've been teaching about, or the Gordon students have been learning about the rise of Hitler and the Weimar Republic and how it kind of Germany descended into madness, right? So we're literally doing that as, as the Capitol is being stormed. Um, we learn about Islamophobia, Japanese internment. During our immigration unit, we look at the construction of white identity by these different waves of immigration. We certainly look at xenophobia. When we study the civil rights unit, we look at mass incarceration and the origins of that. We go in depth with the murder of Emmett Till and look at artistic representations of that. We study the Gilded Age and income inequality. We look at Chinese exclusion, Jim Crow, lynching, convict leasing, right? Feminism and the oppression of women is a unit that we do before winter break every year. And of course, Confederate monuments, because as we go, we head to down south, and that's something that kids are oftentimes really excited to kind of learn more about, understand why these monuments exist. And this is just some of what we cover, right? There's so much going on in the world that I try to bring in current events when I can and try to relate them to this history. And also, there's I have an awareness that, my students' ability to have these conversations, it begins when they're in nursery at Gordon, right? Like it's the conversations that they're having in kindergarten around racial identity, or that they're having in fourth grade around immigration, that they're having in seventh grade around the Constitution. It all adds up, right? It basically, I'm like the finishing school at Gordon, right? I can come in and really have these conversations with kids in large part because of what's gone on for their previous years at the school. So I just want to really acknowledge my colleagues' amazing work. And without their work, nothing I do in eighth grade would be possible. And as many of you probably heard about our civil rights trip. This is the culminating experience of being a Gordon student, right? So you can see on the left there I am taking some students through the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery. It's a lynching memorial. You can see this photo up here of a 19-year-old Morehouse student taking our kids all throughout this historic campus. We walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with Cheyenne Webb. She took us across last year. She was 8 years old on Bloody Sunday, right? At one point, there's a video for sitting in Dr. King's lap, and she tells us about her experience. We go to Dr. King's house. We walk by the desk that he worked at, right? We visit Equal Justice Initiative. We go to the Southern Poverty Law Center, right? So as a teacher, this is kind of like a dream because I know that I'm building to this, right? This really seminal experience that kids are going to remember forever, right? So just for those who don't know, that gives you a sense of, the altitude that we're operating at in eighth grade humanities, right? There's a lot expected of kids as far as what they're processing and how they're gonna, have conversations about this stuff. So let's just, backing up a little bit, one thing that you may have become very aware of, especially since the George Floyd protests began, are these anti-bias or anti-racist trainings, right? And, these might be corporate trainings where, maybe you're working at a law firm and there's a diversity expert who comes and does a couple sessions, talks about, white guilt or or I should say white fragility. And oftentimes these trainings are one-offs, right? And at Gordon, I think, it's this work is infused in all of our curricula, right? And I think that's a point I want to make. So, and there's a great paper by these two sociologists that kind of highlight some of the points about why these like one-off trainings don't work, right? Especially when you're not having other conversations. In general, right? This is common sense. Short-term educational interventions really don't change people. And anti-bias training, this is kind of counterintuitive, at least it was to me. Anti-bias training activates stereotypes. Field and lab studies find that asking people to suppress stereotypes tends to reinforce them, right? Which is kind of counterintuitive, but it makes sense in a way. Anti-bias training inspires unrealistic confidence in anti-discrimination programs, making employees complacent about their own biases, right? Oh, I did the training last year. I'm good. I don't have to think about this anymore. It can make white people feel excluded and reduces their support for diversity. Now, this is a really interesting one, right? Like, in terms of like, what's best for white people in these contexts may not always be best for people of color, but still this is a finding from these two sociologists as they looked at the research on this. Also, we know from a large body of organizational research that people react negatively to efforts to control them. If you tell someone not to be racist, right? Just say, hey, stop being racist, it's bad. That actually doesn't work, right? And so I just want just to like frame it that way, and that what we're doing at Gordon is very intentional, and it's years in the making, right? Um, and so one thing I'm always thinking about, is what actually reduces racial bias. There's lots of theories about why these biases exist, how to prevent them, right? We could talk about segregation, as I think is probably the number one reason, right? Our society is segregated. But Gordon Allport, who is a psychologist, he wrote a book called The Nature of Prejudice, and it published in 1954. And I love it because it really boils it down to something pretty simple. It's called the contact hypothesis, right? And there's some parts of this theories, right? Allport found, again, he looked at reams of social psychology data. He did his own survey research. He did interviews, looked at efforts to integrate public housing in certain cities in the East Coast. This is what he found. How do you reduce racial bias? The members of the two groups have to have equal status. That's one, right? And that's a hard thing to get at. Allport believed that contact in which members of one group are treated as subordinate was not going to reduce racial prejudice, right? And might actually make things worse. Maybe that's clear. Another piece is that the members of the two groups have common goals. Something to keep in mind and really important as our country is so divided and the values don't seem to be so common. It's critical, at least in Allport's research. The members of the two groups work cooperatively, right? Allport wrote, only the type of contact that leads people to do things together is likely to result in changed attitudes. So just being in proximity with people of different races isn't necessarily gonna get you there, right? You have to be working with common goals, working towards a common purpose, at least according to Allport. Another piece, the last piece here, is there is institutional support for contact. For example, if group leaders or other authority figures support the contact between groups, right? So if the people who are in charge of a city, an organization, a country, right? If they're really, if they're honoring this work, and if they're really talking about that this contact is important, that also impacts this, or I should say reduces racial bias. So you can see, it's the contact hypothesis is interesting, and they've done some studies actually recently, and they found, and there's a lot of support for this hypothesis, right? And maybe this feels like common sense to a lot of us, right? Now, the reality is we live in America, which is a very segregated country, and a lot of this stuff is outside of our control, right? We may not live in integrated communities. We may not have access to other people outside of our racial groups, right? We may work in places that are pretty homogenous, right? So given that, what can we control at Gordon, right? That's really what we're thinking about. Now, obviously, we try to, we have our numbers around diversity, right? That's critical to our mission, critical to our school, right? As far as our student population resembling, the real world, right? That's really important to us, right? We also bring in people like Howard Stevenson. You may have, some of you may have been at his talk a couple months ago. Wonderful professor of urban education at the University of Pennsylvania. I really encourage you, if you haven't, to check out his TED Talk. He has a great essay also called The Lion Story, where he talks about this idea of racial storytelling. And I love this quote. Without racial storytelling, educators, politicians, parents, law enforcement, and children are stuck tolerating differences, acquiescing to levels of racial avoidance, rather than committing to the higher ground of racial literacy and competence of humanity, right? So just pause here for a second and think about what I just told you about these one-off anti-bias trainings, how they don't really have much impact, except for maybe causing more of a problem, right? And how contact is so critical, right? That that the type of contact has to be, it's very specific, right? The type of contact that works. This other piece is really, I think, a way of kind of managing that contact. And when you're in a group that's racially diverse, I think it's really important to give people chances to tell their stories. And I really encourage you with your own children, right? And this is a conversation that's sometimes awkward, hard to have. Hopefully by the end of this session today, you feel armed and maybe more capable, I should say, of having these conversations if you're having difficulty with them in your own home, because they're messy, but man, are they important. So in the classroom, I use racial storytelling a lot, right? I tell my own story. I have the kids tell their stories. And we use this thing called the picture essay, right? Where the kids are first asked to think about their 8 social identifiers. Again, this work doesn't start with me. Kids have been learning about their social identifiers for years at Gordon by the time they come to 8th grade. So when I show them this slide, it's not, it's not really challenging to them. They have a sense of, okay, there are these things that society, these labels that society puts on people. There are ways in which they're perceived that are tied to things outside of their control, right? So I help the kids really think about, okay, which of these identifiers do you think are most important, most significant in terms of how you're read in the world, right? I also do. So you all had a chance to read my essay. I hope you did anyway. Don't judge too harshly. I was a junior when I wrote this. I was a junior in high school when I wrote this. Um, and if you didn't read it, it's about me going to a new school as a 5th grader and having to confront my racial identity for the first time. I really use it to model racial storytelling before the students begin this essay, the picture essay. And again, that requires them to examine different aspects of their identity. So you can see, there I am with my dad. I was probably in, I guess, maybe in 8th grade in that photo there. And there's a picture of there up there on top of my of where I went to middle school. It's called J.R. Masterman. It's a magnet school. It's in North Philadelphia. And I had to take a bus and a trolley to get there from my house in West Philly. And it was the first time at this school when I realized that, oh, wait a second, I have to choose, and that there's consequences if I don't choose, right? And my dad, by the way, is a sociologist, right? He studies race and ethnic relations. It's not like I didn't have people at my house to talk to about this. My mom is a creative writer. She's a fiction writer. Both really conscious, reflective people. But it's interesting. I think it's worth noting that by the time I was in 5th grade, I still, I knew I was a Black person, but I didn't really think about choosing and what that might mean for me, right? And so if you'll bear with me for just a sec, I'm going to read just like a quick excerpt from my essay, just to kind of frame it a little bit for you. So I'm going to read just from the beginning here. You don't deserve to be Black. Throughout my 2-year stint at J.R. Masterman School, I was to hear these words on more than one occasion. When one is age 10 and confronted with questions about racial identity and his role in an ethnic group, he does not realize the scope of the personal development which he is about to undergo. Masterman is built in the shape of a huge concrete U, towering 5 stories up with a brick courtyard on the inside curve of the U shape. It was in this courtyard that 400 or 500 5th and 6th graders gathered in the mornings before school started. Here, children would discuss last night's television, gossip about what girl liked what boy, or simply make fun of one another interminably. The racial divide at Masterman was most obvious here on the courtyard. The Black males would primarily lean against the walls, while the Black females would play jump rope or hopscotch. The white children would form in groups similar to the Blacks, with the only difference being that they would either sit on the great stone steps leading to the courtyard or stand in tightly knit circles spread across the bricks. My position in all of this was somewhat ambiguous. I was friends with many of the white children, as I knew them from my diverse middle-class neighborhood in West Philadelphia, near the University of Pennsylvania's campus. However, being the product of a white mother and a Black father, my light brown complexion drew me to the Black children instinctively. It was expected of me by the Black children to associate with them for no other reason than I was Black like them. With this expectation of me to stand with them came the expectation to act like a Black person should act in their eyes. What this idea of being Black was, I had no clue, but was on the verge of finding out. So there's a reason why I have the students read this story, right? Like, as a teacher, or really anyone who wants to get people to share, the more that you can talk about your own struggles with an issue, right? The more that you can talk about how it's messy and how it's not going to be wrapped up into a nice, neat bow by a certain date or time, it really unlocks it for kids, and it gives kids a way in. Also, kids like hearing about their teachers when they were younger. let's just be honest, right? And I go on a little bit. I'm going to just read one more little part, which really I think gets at some of the things that our students. This part I think really resonates with the kids. The most cumbersome obstacle in my acceptance within the exclusive Black community at Masterman, even more so than my inherent lack of knowledge of how a Black person should act, were my grades. As I, Most of the white students and several other Black boys and girls flew through fifth grade with A's and B's. Other Black boys would struggle with C's and D's. I can never quite resolve this in my own mind, except that most of the Black boys, despite their other favorable traits, were obviously stupid. My teacher seemed to agree with me. Frank Gallo, a beast of a man, standing at about 6'4" with a booming, jolly baritone voice, was my fifth grade teacher. He seemed like a nice enough guy, as he was always giving special attention to some of the Black boys in my class. One of his favorites was one of my few Black friends, Simeon Poles, a very dark-skinned boy who constantly struggled and worked harder than I, simply to receive C's. Mr. Gallo would ask Simeon a difficult question as he grappled with the answer, a condescending smile would come over Mr. Gallo's face. Come on, Sim, Gallo again would smile maliciously and leer at poor Simeon. Don't tell me you don't know the answer. Come on, buddy, you're one of my best students. I know you know the answer. One could almost see Mr. Gallo's mocking and taunting gnawing away at Simeon's dignity. And it goes on and on. And I think as I show this, as I go through this with the kids, with the students, they start to realize that, oh wow, I may have seen something like that happen in my own life, right? And they start talking about these racial incidents, as Howard Stevenson talks them, and they start to put language to them, and they start to notice things, right? And this is really one of the ways that I unlock it with them. Now, you might be hearing this and thinking, wow, Luke was such an enlightened 17-year-old. Man, he really had it going. He really understood his identity. He was really precocious. The truth is, not so much. If you look at this picture, I was 17 when I took this picture. And you can see there I am with my multiracial group of friends. We were attending a Quaker school, an elite Quaker school in Philadelphia at this point. So despite this pose that we are trying to strike of being tough and being I don't know what we were thinking. We were probably trying to be like a rap video or something. The reality is that we were probably on our way to meeting for worship, right? Or some other kind of private school activity, right? Maybe we're leaving a soccer game or something like that. So, I show this picture to the kids too, by the way, because I want this also, you get a lot of credibility if you show your students what you look like in high school. But on top of that, I really want the students to know that even when I wrote this essay, I was still kind of clueless, right? And that part of the work of thinking about your racial identity is constantly reflecting on it. And I think it's this idea of having it all figured out. It's, first of all, I don't think it's true, and I don't think it resonates with kids, right? So I think that's one takeaway is that I'm not sure that giving kids all the answers about how they should perceive their own races, I'm not sure if that's always as helpful, at least in my experience. So back to the picture essay. I just wanted, this is taken directly from the assignment sheet, and be prepared because I'm gonna put you guys to work in a second. So the kids read this, right? This assignment, or actually I read it to them. And I'll just read it to you all. A picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Maybe so. But how might a picture also be misleading? What is a picture incapable of expressing or revealing about its subject? More importantly, what do our visible social identifiers, race, gender, age, class, etc., say about us? You're about to explore those very questions. And by the way, I make the kids take a picture, right? They take a photo of themselves using either using their iPads or their laptops. So they take a photo of themselves, and I say, just take an everyday photo of yourself, not pose, not some glamour shot, right? Not your Instagram profile picture. I tell them just to take a photo of themselves sitting in their room or even at their desk, and they paste it to the top of this assignment, right? Onto the top of the outline as they're figuring out their ideas. So then I say, take a look at the picture of yourself. Consider how you are presented. Then consider the ways in which the picture accurately captures and expresses your identity, ways in which it is misleading, and what aspects of your identity were not captured. So I really, really try to name it, right, and spell it out for the kids what we're doing here, right? And having read this story with them beforehand, I think it really generates, in my experience, some really powerful essays from kids. I have an excerpt from a current student, actually, a current 8th grader. And I'm just gonna, if you'll bear with me again, now that you've heard kind of my own, my own essay, I want you just to follow along. I'm just gonna read just one paragraph from this student's essay. And again, think about this too as you prepare to do your own reflecting and journaling. So here we go. From a current Gordon 8th grader, who by the way gave me permission and was super psyched that I was going to share his essay. All right, here we go. When you think of Indian people, who do you think of? Is it Baljit, the nerdy, awkward kid who always has a book and a calculator? Or is it Apu, the convenience store owner with a heavy accent and an arranged marriage? With my white and Indian racial background, I have light skin and slightly curly dark hair, which leads to about 70% of people to assume that I'm Mexican when they first meet me. I practice the Sikh religion. The Sikh religion believes in equality for everybody and protecting those who can't protect themselves, but I don't wear a turban. And the only religious thing I wear is a kada, a silver bracelet that signifies dedication to the religion. Some people may think I don't wear a turban because I'm not proud of my religion. But the real reason is because I've seen what my dad and uncle and other people from my religion have had to put up with. When I'm with my dad or uncle in public, we always get second looks, whether it's from regular people or police. It is still unsettling. I've also read about the violence against my people after 9/11. There were over 300 cases of hate crimes against my people, including several murders, and multiple gurdwaras or temples were burned down. I'm not ashamed of my religion, but I am mindful of discrimination my people face just for practicing our religion. Who knew 8th graders could be so reflective, right? That essay to me, and it goes on and on. He talks about being on his basketball team and stereotypes that and how certain people said things to him that he didn't like and how he dealt with that, right? But what that student is doing is really truly reflecting in a really authentic way about who he is, why he doesn't wear a turban, and in fact talking to his parents. That's not the whole story, right? It turns out that this decision to not wear a turban was an agonizing decision for them that they really thought hard about. And in fact, this essay is going to generate a conversation with them and their son, right? And that's also what I encourage. So I tell all my students, please show your parents your essays, which I'm sure they never do. But I think the power of giving kids chance to reflect, modeling your own vulnerability, your own lack of certitude about this stuff, right? Giving them a format and a forum to talk about it, it works wonders in my experience. So with that, I'm going to show you the social identifiers for just for a second. And if you haven't grabbed a pen or a paper, I'll give you just like 15, 20, 30 seconds to scramble and grab a pen and paper. And if you have your pen and paper out, you might want to jot down which of these identities or identifiers you think is most important to you personally. You might think about your gender, or your age, your sexual orientation, knowing that there are others, right, including language, family configuration, learning style, etc. So take a second. Okay, hopefully we got some paper ready to go. So now let's see, what time is it? It's 7:05. I'm gonna ask you if you would again indulge me in 10 minutes of journaling. I think about input a lot, input versus output with my students, right? Just giving you guys a lot of input, a lot of information, a lot of talking, reading to you guys. I want now a chance for you to really have some output here, right? So we're starting, let's say when I finish talking, I'm gonna give you 10 minutes to journal. You can look at your image on Zoom, or you can turn your video off and look in the mirror. But I want you to give yourself 3 minutes for each question. And these questions, by the way, are taken directly from the picture essay outline, right? And if we're all ready, you can begin journaling. Okay, no problem. I know that there was a lot of conversation just now. And again, I just can't tell you how much I appreciate the vulnerability. Certainly in my group, there was some vulnerability there. And I just really think that, I really feel like we got a lot out of that. I just want to go back to one thing. Here's the thing. We're talking about Gordon, right? And perhaps in some ways this is an ideal, right? I really just want to couple, what are the stakes here? If we're thinking about a school that doesn't provide these opportunities for kids to do racial storytelling, if we think about a place that is alienating to African-American students or students of color, right? A place that's not healthy, frankly, right? I think the stakes are pretty high. You may have heard about this this episode. It was in the New York Times about a week and a half ago now. So the girl on the left, just briefly tell you this quick story. The girl on the left, when she was in ninth grade, she's a senior. She graduated last year. She and the boy on the right, they're classmates at this really kind of affluent, in this affluent suburban district in Virginia. Right? They go to Heritage High School. High school. You can see it there. So the girl on the left, when she was in ninth grade, she was on Snapchat and she was singing some rap song or talking to her friends, and she said the N word right on the Snap video, just like, hey, many white children around this country listen to hip hop and they use the N word, right? Let's just be honest. It doesn't seem like she was saying it as to calling anyone the word, but she was definitely using it, right? The boy on the so that was in ninth grade. The boy on the right saved that video because he had been at this school or in this district for his life, and he hadn't had a lot of adults to talk to when kids said the N word. He didn't have a lot of spaces to talk about this, his feelings as an African American student in this school district, right? He had even gone to teachers in the past and had complained about white kids using the N word or saying insensitive things, and nothing happened, right? So what he takes matters into his own hands. He saves this Snapchat video from when they were in ninth grade, and then when the George Floyd protests happen, and this girl on the left is, like many other people, talking about how woke she is on Instagram and pledging solidarity for Black lives, et cetera, et cetera. He then chooses that moment to post this video of her using the N word, and now is written up in the New York Times. Now, again, clearly this girl shouldn't be using the N word, but I wonder how that reflects on him, right? Like, what does this mean for a boy who is unable, who never had a chance to talk about this, who never had a chance to process this, like for example, like we have in our affinity spaces at Gordon or in our classes at Gordon, and he took matters into his own hands, right? And so I think that we all lose out, obviously, right? When we're not having these conversations intentionally. Again, I wouldn't have told this boy, hey, I know all the answers, what your identity should be, but just listening to him, right? Just hearing him out. I have a feeling he might have been able to avoid something like this. So one more thing I want to just point out here, right? We can't forget what happened last week, right? This is, I know, on your minds. It's definitely on my mind. And as you think about these images, right? Certainly, there's the guy with the Camp Auschwitz shirt. There's the Confederate flag in the Capitol building. To me, was just really a jarring image, right? And I think that if we want our kids to make sense of an event like this, if we want them to really understand how to make sense of our racial past and how it informs our present, we've got to have these conversations, right? It's really a duty that we have to our children. So and really to each other. Just some questions to think about. We really don't really have time to get into a conversation about these, but you might even want to screenshot this or take a photo, because I really hope that you, as we end here, as we wrap up, I want you to think about how are you modeling for your child how to be curious about who they are. And I also want you to think about, in your interactions with your children, how can we continue to prepare them for this sort of learning, and how can we prepare them to think about the events in our world, right? Trump is leaving, but Trumpism is not leaving, right? And certainly racism was here way before Trump. It'll be here way after he's gone. And I think, I hope that we can continue to have these conversations. So some resources and some reading. We're gonna share these slides, but there are so many great books, and I thank my colleagues for helping to provide some of this list. Some of these are novels. Some of these are kind of how-to books. Some of these are nonfiction. These are books that I highly recommend if you want to keep thinking about this stuff. And again, it doesn't have to be like some really highfalutin, sociology text, right? I think a great novel that's talking about race in really kind of inventive and I think informative ways is really helpful. So we'll make sure we share this list with you all for sure after we wrap up here. And I think that's all I have. Yeah, I really appreciate you all. Thank you so much for your time. If you want to email me about any of these resources or learn more about our curriculum, I'm just an email away. And thanks so much.
All right, so that's Luke's sign to pass it over to me. Well played, Luke. Want to remind you that we have 2 events coming up. Wednesday, February 17th, Raising Anti-Racist Children. This will be a conversation that's sponsored by our parent affinity groups, our Parent of Student of Color group, and our Anti-Racism Working Group for White Parents. And then the side B, or part 2 of this conversation with Luke, will be happening March 2nd, Tuesday at 6:30. So please mark your calendars for that. Take a picture of this slide on your phone so you have it with you, and share with your friends. I am hearing that we have folks from Indiana and Massachusetts and New Hampshire. So welcome to this space. I want to thank Luke, colleague and friend, for his leadership at Gordon around this topic, and also just his masterful presentation skills and teaching skills. You all got a taste of what it feels like to be in his classroom today, with his prompts, his stories, and authenticity. And we hope that Luke modeled for you how you could be with your children, authentic and honest. This is hard. We don't know the answers all the time. We don't have to be right. But we also know that engaging in these conversations is a skill. It takes practice. And it doesn't just happen. And we know that as adults, when we're just starting these conversations, how hard it is. And I think that's something that Gordon does so well, is from the time that children are in nursery school, are preparing them for working with each other, talking to each other, collaborating with each other, arguing with each other, voicing their opinions with each other, not in a way that closes down conversation, but in a way that opens up understanding. And we hope you got a taste of that this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to Luke and to all the facilitators who supported us tonight. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Everyone, take care.
Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank